I'm Dean. I'm the dad.
I'm Laura. I'm the mom.
And I'm Krysta. I'm the daughter.
And together we are
Family
Plot. Well, that was nice. How is everyone this evening?
Good.
As am I. I'm doing okay. Well, to the listeners, welcome to the show. If you want to help us out, a couple of ways you can do that. Of course, there's Patreon. We have $1, $3, $5, and $10 donations. Team Podcast, Team Bunny, Team Spa Day. Doesn't matter which way you go. It all helps us out. If you can't do a monthly thing, buy me a coffee. You can do a one-time donation. And if you can't do that, we understand that too. Our thing then becomes, if you enjoy the show, please share it on social media. And if you don't, just keep it to yourself. There we go. So, what are we talking about today? Well, today we go back to July 30th, 1945, and the sinking of the USS Indianapolis. Now, the USS Indianapolis was a Portland-class heavy cruiser. Recently, it had been damaged by a kamikaze plane and returned to Pearl Harbor to be repaired. Its first assignment after that, to deliver parts for the Hiroshima bomb. Upon delivering its cargo, it proceeded towards Layte Gulf to prepare for the invasion of Japan. However, it was targeted and sunk by a Japanese submarine, and the U.S. Navy never received its distress call. For the next 4 days, the men floated in the salt water of the ocean, exposed the elements and hungry sharks, before they were finally rescued on August 2nd, 1945.
Wow.
Right, and they were rescued over the next 24 hours. Of the nearly 1,200 men aboard the Indianapolis, 900 survived the initial attack and went into the water. Of those, only 316 survived.
Wow. Well-fed sharks.
It isn't just the sharks. Now, the sharks get a significant amount of blame, but there's a lot that goes on in there, and we'll talk about all of it. But first, before we get to any of that, I believe Krysta has some facts.
Krysta.
I do.
Oh, wait, more claps. I gave them to you once, but, you know, what the heck, more claps.
She deserves extra applause, really.
Yeah.
Alright, so today's facts are from historyofships.net. And it's about, if you couldn't tell already, ships and boats.
Ships and boats.
In the world today, accounting for some 16% of the world's tonnage.
Ooh, so they move a lot of cargo.
Yeah.
Now, that was fact number one, right?
Yeah.
Or was that just an extra fact?
That was fact number one.
Yay!
Fact number two. The world's longest ship was a Seawise giant oil tanker built 1979 and broken up 2009. World's largest passenger ship is MS Alerts of the Seas, built in 2000.
Very nice.
Cool. Fact number three. A painted disc found in
Kuwait.
Kuwait? Okay. Found in Kuwait has the earliest representation of a ship under sail. The disc was made between 5,550.
Wow. So I didn't know the sailing ships went back that far. That is awesome. Three.
This is fact number 4 now.
4.
Nope.
Sorry, your little sister loves Mr.
Yeah.
Mouse.
So, Lexi, not to interrupt your facts, is it okay
You're
if I
good.
tell this story real quick? So, Lexi has decided that Mr. Mouse is her friend.
Oh no.
And now Lexi actually calls Mr. Mouse out when we're just sitting in my room in the evening. She'll call Mr. Mouse out to have conversations with her.
Dad!
He waited till our backs were turned, and then he got the baby on his side. Which she's not a baby anymore. She's 5, but still.
She's easy to trick.
So now, the baby is friends with Mr. Mouse, which means we're never going to get rid of him.
Now that was intentional.
Oh, so the first one wasn't?
No, the first one was not.
Okay, anyway, I felt that there was a need to share that with the group.
Oh my gosh.
I know. Okay.
Fact number 4. There's archaeological evidence that indicates that people used ships some 12,000 years ago. No, it's 1,200,000 years ago in populating of the Borneo? No.
Borneo.
Yeah,
That is.
Borneo. I believe it's in Africa. Well, you are eating chicken, and that is his favorite food by far.
Leave me alone. I'm not sharing. Nope. Fact number 5. Final fact.
That was really fast, but go ahead.
Ancient Egyptians built their first ships by sewing planks together with straps to make a hole, and by stuffing reeds or grass in between planks.
Yes, they did. I want to say Thor Heyerdahl made a ship called the Kon-Tiki.
I used the Kon-Tiki.
That same way. So yeah, interesting, very interesting. Well, here we go. More claps for the Krysta.
How many claps today?
Wow. So yeah, we learned a lot about ships and boats and ships. Okay, so are you ready to learn about the Indianapolis?
I suppose we are.
Alrighty. I'm going to start in March 31st, 1945. Now, the Indianapolis was built actually in the 1930s, and it actually eventually became the flagship of the Fifth Fleet. But I didn't want to go through the entire history of the boat because a lot of it is kind of boring.
Okay. Yeah, we don't really need boring.
So, in March 31st, 1945, the Indianapolis had been in Layte Gulf, where it was regularly targeted by kamikaze pilots.
Whenever you say kamikaze, I think of like Comic-Con.
Kamikaze means...
I know kamikaze is different.
Yeah, kamikaze means divine wind in Japanese. And it was a way that Japan had started fighting the war. They were losing, and they didn't have enough resources to continually build new ships and new weapons. So they started to think of ways they could put the resources they had to good use. And one of those ways was to get Japanese pilots, give Japanese pilots a couple of glasses of sake, get them in a plane.
Sake?
Sake is Japanese rice wine. Very powerful stuff.
I thought it was sake.
It might be sake. I've always heard it as sake, but I've also only heard it from Americans. So sake might be the actual Japanese pronunciation. If so, thank you. Anyway, they'd give them a couple cups of sake, and these guys would then take their planes and fly it into ships, causing massive amounts of damage.
Oh, lovely.
And it was called Divine Wind because one pilot in a plane could do massive amount of damage.
Oh, lovely.
So, now, and in Layte Gulf, which is the Gulf near Japan, they were bombarded on a regular basis by these kamikaze pilots. And in fact, they had just shot one out of the sky the day before, just before it would have hit the ship. They were able to knock it out of the sky and it didn't hit the ship. But the following day, one came out of the sun, which is to say that it flew so that if you were looking up, you'd be looking into the sun and it would be harder to see. So it came out of the sun and they noticed it at the last minute. Now, they made evasive maneuvers. They did their best to shoot it down. The plane evaded everything. It struck the back of the ship and it caused lots of damage, but it did not sink the ship.
What the? Wait, isn't that supposed to sink right away?
Well, if it hits right, yeah, but it
didn't hit right.
It hit the back of the boat. So it did some damage. So
that's a lot of damage.
Yes, but it didn't sink the boat. So the ship limped to Pearl Harbor for repairs because that's where most of these big ships got repaired, was Pearl Harbor.
Right.
Now, while really this is the beginning of the end for the Indianapolis, because it sets off the chain of events that's going to happen that leads to its sinking. So they repair the Indianapolis. Now, as it was repaired, many seamen went to visit family. They let them go and visit their family because, it's going to take some time to repair the ship. So, and many reported a strange sense of foreboding as they were hanging out with their family. Most of the seamen returned to the Indianapolis along with 200 new recruits fresh out of basic training. Many who would not survive the voyage. Her crew complement was 1,196 people. Because another ship in dry dock was not finished with its repairs, the Indianapolis was given the mission to deliver components for the bomb known as Fat Man, because there were two bombs that were built, two nuclear bombs that were built to drop on Japan. One was called Fat Man, one was called Little Boy.
What the?
Okay. Whew.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. It popped in my headphones, and I was like, what was that?
Yeah, because he yanked the cord.
Gotcha. I just checked it, so we're good. It was delivering the components for the bomb they called Fat Man. Now, most of the crew had little to no idea what the secret cargo was. It was a big metal box and lots of metal tubes. Now, they safely delivered their cargo to Tinian Island, and then they were ordered to Layte Gulf to join the USS Idaho in preparation for the invasion of Japan.
Right.
Oh, Lord. This is gonna go insane.
It must be something in the air. I had the worst time talking at work today, too.
Also, something that I saw in one of the documentaries I watched, most of the people on board had no clue what this secret cargo was. And in fact, there was a rumor on board ship that it was whiskey that once the Japanese surrendered was going to be, they were going to use to celebrate. Or the other idea was that it was some general's toy. Because the generals and admirals often got things delivered, barbecue pits and other such things. So they thought, well, maybe it's that.
What if it was none of them? It was the sake. They stole the sake.
No, it was parts for Fat Man. We know that. But the thing is, if you had told the guys on the boat that they were delivering a big bomb, it wouldn't have impressed them. There's tons of bombs on the boat. What's one more mean? It would have really disappointed them.
Yeah, I know, but I was just...
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
Wow, you were a comedian, and now you don't know what a joke is.
So, yeah, they were ordered to join, I want to say it's the USS Idaho, which was going to be their sister ship in Layte Gulf, and they were going to attack Japan. Well, they didn't quite make it. On their way, they were targeted by the sub I-58. It was a Japanese sub, and they hit the Indianapolis with 2 torpedoes. Hit them pretty much dead on in the center of the ship. The ship sank in 12 and a half minutes.
Yeah, that's pretty quick.
That makes sense.
It went down fast, fast, fast. Of the 1,196 people that were on the boat, 900 went in the water. That means some went down with the ship, just couldn't get off, were too deep in the lower levels or whatever. It means that some people were just injured by the torpedo blast and were either killed instantly or damaged enough they couldn't get off. But yes, so that's 900 people that go in the water. And that's July 31st or July 30th of 1945. So these guys are in the water, and we need to go back a step. We need to go back to Fat Man. Because they had just delivered Fat Man, but you need to understand that...
Who came up with that name? That's so inappropriate.
Who came up with the name Fat Man and who came up with the name Little Boy?
I don't know. I didn't look into those things.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Probably
if you think about it, so this is one of the bombs that they dropped on Hiroshima?
Well, it's the bomb they dropped on Hiroshima. Little Boy was dropped on Nagasaki.
So do you know how freaking terrible that is? Hiroshima was destroyed by having a Fat Man dropped on it. That is horrendous. That is so awful. I am sorry to all of the overweight male individuals in the world for saying that. But who? Why? America, that's wrong.
America, that's
so wrong.
It was 1945.
And it's wrong.
Too close to this day and age.
It was 1945.
1945.
Terrible.
Too close.
That is terrible. Hiroshima was taken out by dropping a Fat Man on it. That's awful.
Well, technically, it was the Fat Man. There was only one.
That's still really bad. Anyway, I'm sorry. Continue.
But those parts that they were carrying, the captain, Captain Charles B. McVeigh, was told, if the ship got hit, those parts went in a lifeboat before a single man did.
Yeah, okay. Who's going to put them there? Duh.
Just telling you, that's how serious they were with this. So there was a.
Yeah, they were so serious they named it Batman. What's wrong with them? Sorry.
Please.
He can. If it's really that bad, he can always cut it out.
It's not.
Saying, it's. I find it offensive. Right?
Well, Nagasaki was destroyed by having the little boy dropped on it. I feel like that's.
I feel like all of it's offensive, but the name makes it that much more offensive. Like, I've never heard that before. But, I mean, I was probably drawing pictures.
Well, there was a movie called Fat Man and Little Boy starring Paul. Oh, he has his own.
Newman?
Yes, Paul Newman. And he played the general that was in charge of the project. So maybe Paul Newman did it. Let's blame Paul Newman. Dirty Paul Newman. Okay. So.
Okay, let's move on, kids.
Really?
Yeah.
So there has been a report for years, and it has a lot to do with the movie Jaws, and we'll talk about that later, that because they had been on this secret mission, they were not allowed to send in a distress signal. That is not true, as we will find out later.
Okay.
But I wanted to put that...
Again, I feel like, okay, that may be what they were told, but at the end of the day, if the ship starts to sink, they're gonna send a distress signal. I guess maybe I'm not a good soldier. It's a good thing I wasn't in our military, because I probably would be a terrible soldier.
Well, at first, the men in the water felt confident about their chances of rescue. I mean, this had just happened after midnight on the 30th. So when they went in the water, it was dark. They couldn't even see all of their crew. Right. In fact, one of the things that would take so long about rescuing them is they were spread out over 25 miles of ocean.
Yeah. I guess that would probably make it easier for the sharks to pick them off, too. What? It's true?
I know. I just didn't expect you to say something as dark as that.
So, but as I said, at first the men in the water, they felt confident about their chance of rescue.
Right.
Even if they had not got off a distress call, which many of them thought they had not, they were due to arrive the following day. And when they didn't, they felt sure the Navy would send ships to find and rescue them. The water was full of oil that got all over everything. However, when the ship failed to arrive the next day, and here I'm talking about the Indianapolis, when it failed to arrive, the Navy took no notice of it. Now, the men floated together in groups. Some were in boats and life rafts. Some were in cargo nets that were floating, and some were just gathered together in groups. Now, the sun beat down on them during the day. It burned their eyes, and it sunburned them pretty bad, because they weren't just getting the sun beating down on their heads, but it was reflecting on the water back up at them. Not good at all. Now, at night, the sea was freezing cold. Almost cold enough to freeze them in place. Now, a few of the men dipped their hands and faces in the oil that was floating on the water from the sunken ship and would rub it on their skin, which turned out to be a fairly effective sunblock. They certainly didn't suffer as much sun damage as some of the others, and they didn't suffer as much glare blindness as the others. Now, many of the groups were attacked by sharks.
Sure.
Oceanic white tips, mako sharks, and tiger sharks killed several. Now, it's important to note that mako sharks are essentially like the cheetahs of the ocean. Very, very fast. They attack quick, and their teeth are kind of curved inwards more than most sharks, so they really get a good handle on whatever flesh they get hold of and just yank it out. Whereas tiger sharks are regularly listed as one of the sharks that attacks humans most. So we're really dealing with basically super predators of the ocean here. Dragging some other or away, or just leaving grisly evidence of their attacks on the surface.
Ew.
And like I said, the men were scattered over 25 miles of ocean, making it even harder to locate them. The men who were in boats, they could actually get a little sustenance. Many of the men had cans of Spam on them because it was the military's like, you're going to be in a lifeboat, we're going to give you Spam. And
I give you Spam. I'm not even going to eat this until I'm about to die.
And so the guys in the boats and the life rafts would open a can of Spam and they'd cut off little chunks of it and serve it to the men. And they'd ration it out really tiny pieces, just trying to keep food in everybody. Well, the men in the water and the cargo nets, not so much. Because when they opened their cans of Spam, it brought sharks.
Right.
And it brought hungry sharks that weren't afraid of the men floating in the water. And so eventually they just stopped trying to eat. Now, in addition to sharks and hunger, the men were suffering the effects of dehydration, lacking any source of fresh water. Their tongues dried out and got thick, which means they had problems speaking. Their throats swelled, making breathing difficult. Many of the men in the water, after a day or two, just couldn't resist and began drinking salt water. This was bad. One, salt water dehydrates you even further. It doesn't provide you with any liquidity, any of the hydration that regular water gives you. They also began to suffer from salt poisoning, which would cause them to hallucinate.
Right.
And these hallucinations were often violent. Like some of the men who got violent suddenly thought their friends were Japanese soldiers. And so they were trying to kill them. Now, as I said, they're in a lot of different groups. Now, one of the men who had a group together was Captain McVeigh. He did a very good job of policing his men. When he saw the men trying to drink, he would find ways to stop them, or he would get them to sing songs. He would try to distract them from what they were going through. The doctor was with a different group, and as he noticed these bloody-lipped men putting their faces in the water to drink, he would do everything in his power to stop them, even going so far as to hit them. It did no good. They would drink the seawater anyway. Some men became so delusional, and they talk about this. There's a documentary that they did for the Discovery Channel for Shark Week. In fact, Richard Dreyfuss is the narrator for it, and Dreyfuss played the character Hooper in Jaws. But anyway, he was talking about how some of these men would see imaginary islands and begin to swim for them. Or like one guy turned to his friends and was like, hey, I can feel the ship right under my feet. I'm going to go get a drink from the water fountain and an ice cream. Do you want anything? And his friends tried to convince him not to swim down because the boat was at the bottom of the Gulf of the Philippines, and it definitely was not right below his feet. But he swam down anyway. Nobody saw him ever again. Yeah.
That's what happens when you're done.
So that took its toll. Now, in addition to that, many of the men went into the water injured. Some of them were burned. Some of them had wounds from shrapnel or were cut open on their way out, got cut on some part of the ship that got broken apart or whatever. Some of those men just died from their injuries. There's just nothing they could do. And those men would sink below the waves. So now the salt water was also causing problems with the men's skin because salt water is basically acidic. Now, you can spend a few hours in it without any real ill effect, but after about a day, you're going to start noticing some things. And so, like, they noticed wounds in their skin beginning to appear, and like the hair would just pop off of them. It was literally corroded off. So yeah, so they're dealing with that as well.
Gross.
And to say the sharks were a problem, they were. But like some groups saw sharks constantly and fought them off constantly. Other groups never saw a single shark in the entire 4 days. Now, that being said, a lot of the guys who did deal with sharks are not fans of sharks. They don't like sharks. If they saw a shark this very day, they would kill it. They think they're big believers in kill all the sharks. I don't agree with it because, I'm a bit environmental in that I don't think we should just wholesale destroy a species. But yeah, a lot of these guys, and forgivably so, very down on sharks.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Even to this day. Not that there's a lot of survivors. So they went in the water July 30th. That was at night.
Uh-huh.
The next morning, they were dealing with sharks.
Right.
The following night, men are like, hey, I'm going to go to sleep. I bet you there's a ship here in the morning. And so they were still trying to keep their spirits up on the second night.
Right.
Obviously, the next morning, no ship. And so, as this happens, they're starting to become more and more disheartened.
Of course.
And
as you would.
And in fact, one of the survivors talks about on August 2nd, which was really the last day that nobody knew where they were. He felt like he was dying. He felt like he was sure to die. And he didn't want to die dirty. So he got some of the seawater. He washed the oil off of his face and his hands as best he could. And then he just waited to die. Now, it didn't happen, and he didn't do anything to add to it, but he waited to die. Yeah. Also, there's a point in the movie Jaws where the character of Quint, played by legendary actor Robert Shaw, talks about how he saw a friend of his floating in the water, and he thought he was asleep. And so he goes to wake his friend up. Well, his friend flips upside down, and the sharks had sheared him in half just below the waist. That actually happened to one of the the naval men.
Oh,
That was based on a true story.
gotcha.
Yeah, it was not a good place to be.
Oh, of course.
No.
So, unfortunately, we're going to leave the men here for a few minutes. While
I mean, it's way better than the military that left them there for 4 days. So.
Well, we're going to leave them here for a minute while we take a moment for a word from our sponsors. Hon, how do you feel? Yes, you do.
You scared me.
So, on August 2nd, 1945, a plane was testing a new antenna in the area and had to fly low for the test. The antenna became loose as the plane...
That doesn't sound good.
No, but they needed the antenna for readings, and so the plane's captain had to go back and try to figure out how to reattach it. Now, as he was in the back part of his plane trying to figure out how to reattach this antenna, he looked down and he saw this glint off the water, and it was very unusual. And he realized it was an oil slick. Oil slicks only happen when something goes down in the water. As he looked closer, he could see people moving in the slick. Now, he couldn't tell if they were Americans or Japanese or Australian. He didn't know who they were, but he knew there were people there. So he radioed back to headquarters, and his mission, which had been basically a search and destroy mission, as well as testing this antenna, became search and rescue. So without knowing whether they're Japanese or anything else, he drops his lifeboat and his supplies so that a few of these men can get in it. Also, the thing he notices is that he's never seen more sharks in the water than he sees around this group of men. And remember, he's not even seeing all of them because they're spread around 25 miles of ocean.
Mm-hmm.
So he knows every minute that goes by, they chance losing more men. And in the movie Jaws, Quint mentions the sharks took about a man every 6 minutes, roughly. Mm-hmm. That kind of works out. I didn't do all the math, but it sounds about right. Mm-hmm. So he strongly suspected nothing good was going to happen here. And the funny thing to me is this is 1945. Now, the Matewan Creek shark attacks, which we've talked about, happened in 1916, just not even 30 years earlier. And at that point, people didn't believe sharks attacked people. So it's interesting to note that not even 30 years later, that had changed. This guy was worried about these men in the water because he could see all the sharks swimming near them.
Yeah, and we definitely know that sharks were eating them since they, had taken some of them out below the waist.
So, finally, about 3 hours later, a plane landed that had the ability to land on the water, and I forget the name of the plane, and that's bad storytelling on my part, so I apologize, but landed on the water, and, it was all they could do just to get some men in the plane. Men were trying to climb on the wings, and they literally had to push a few off. And in those final moments, a lot of guys drowned because they would see this plane land and they'd swim for it. And they just didn't have the strength. So within 20 hours of the time they've been noticed, they've all been rescued. And in the end, 316 men were rescued. Many would describe their harrowing experiences with sharks. Some came out of the water with their skin starting to slough off or missing the flesh and muscle on their toes due to their extended soak in salt water. Like I said, it's acidic. So it's like spending 4 days in a low-grade acid. Among the rescued was the ship's doctor and ship captain Charles B. McVeigh. In the days that followed, with the men recovering in a Navy hospital, the bombs Fat Man and Little Boy were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, respectively, effectively ending the war in the Pacific.
Wow.
So, this is where most people would tell you the story ends. The story does not end there. There is one more casualty that we have to talk about.
The shark being your death?
No, it's the captain, and I'll explain. In the aftermath, Charles B. McVeigh asked the Navy, "We sent distress signals. Why didn't you respond? We were gone for 4 days. Why didn't you send someone to look for us?" The Navy never answered him. Never. Eventually, he gets a letter, and he's going to be tried by military tribunal for his poor leadership leading to the sinking of the ship and no distress call being sent.
Seriously. So they're going to make him, well, it sounds like our military. So let's just say that, it's all your fault. So we have somebody to blame because you were the captain. Yeah.
Well, McVeigh was charged really with two things. One, failure to zigzag.
What?
Zigzag, what?
Ships in this part of the Pacific were supposed to zigzag because it was believed it would help them avoid attacks from submarines. Their thing was he failed to zigzag like he properly should have. They also charged him failing to order to abandon the ship in a timely manner. That
he had 11 minutes. Wow, sorry.
I'm not saying it makes sense. I'm trying to explain all what.
I know. I just sometimes it makes me sad that this is our government. And I get it that it was 1947 or whatever, but
it's still just awful.
I'm sorry.
It's fine. It's fine. I don't have a problem with it. So at the military tribunal, one of the radio operators that survived, obviously, testified that he sent a distress signal as the ship was sinking. But the Navy claims they did not receive it. Now, somehow, the Navy received 3 separate distress signals from the ship. The first one, they ignored. The second one, they thought was a Japanese ruse. And the third, well, the officer on duty had ordered not to be disturbed.
Okay, so now they should just kind of slacking off and don't care.
Well, further on top of that, as the Indianapolis was heading towards Layte Gulf, Captain McVeigh asked the Navy 4 times for a destroyer escort. 4 times. Mm-hmm. Every time the Navy denied him. The captain was insistent that ships in this area weren't supposed to be traveling by themselves. They were always supposed to be traveling with a destroyer escort. Well, yeah, again, the Navy continued to deny him. So here we are back at the tribunal. Now, the Navy brings in what they think of as their star witness. Japan has surrendered by this time. So who do they bring in? Hashimoto, the guy that had commanded the sub that sunk the Indianapolis.
Oh, freaking
Are
great.
you kidding me?
No, they bring him in. And they ask him because they're trying to prove that the captain didn't zigzag. And the first thing Hashimoto says was, it wouldn't have mattered if they did or they didn't. I had them dead to rights. They didn't know I was there. I fired a spread of 6 torpedoes. If they had moved and tried to zigzag, they just would have been hit in a different spot by 2 different torpedoes. I accounted for that possibility. Plus, they had these things called chitin, which were like underwater kamikazes. They were like mini subs that just, they'd stick a guy in and he'd go ram it into the side of a big ship. And when they first fired the torpedoes and the ship took 11 minutes to sink, there were some chitin pilots on board that were begging Hashimoto for a shot to go finish this boat off. And he wouldn't let them because he knew he'd nailed it. And that was his testimony, was it didn't matter what they did. When they didn't know I was there, they were getting sunk that day. That was Hashimoto's. So you would think Charles is in the clear. Nope. They don't convict him on the charge of failing to order a proper abandoned ship in a timely manner. They do convict him on not zigzagging, which is ridiculous because zigzagging in this day and age, if you ask any sort of admiral the benefits of zigzagging against a sub, he'll tell you it's negligible at best. But the military wanted a scapegoat, and they picked Charles McVeigh.
They pick whatever they can go with.
Now,
whatever they can get their hands on, they will grab. That is what I've learned about.
Now, the admiral that was in charge of the tribunal wasn't a nice guy. I mean, even today they talk about how he was vindictive, and if you ever did anything he didn't like, he would find a way to make you pay. The admiral that took over after him, Chester Nimitz, he hired McVeigh to work a desk for the Navy, and he let him finish his career working a desk for the Navy. But on November 6th, 1968, and need to do a trigger warning here, we're going to mention a suicide. So if you are triggered by such things, spin on a bit. If not, that's fine. Just understand that we do not condone suicide. In fact, there is a 988, I believe, is the international suicide hotline. If you're feeling those urges, please reach out. Talk to a family, talk to a friend, talk to a health professional. Reach out to us, reach out to your favorite podcast, reach out to your Uncle Murray. I don't care. Just please, the world is a much better place with you in it. Absolutely. So, with that being said, on November 6, 1968, McVeigh took his own life by shooting himself with his service pistol in his home in Litchfield, Connecticut, holding in his hand a toy sailor he had received as a boy, which he carried forever as a good luck charm. He was found on his back porch by his gardener. Though a note was not left, McVeigh was known to those close to him to have suffered from loneliness, particularly after losing his first wife to cancer in 1961. McVeigh also struggled throughout his life from the impact of vitriolic letters and phone calls he periodically received from grief-stricken relatives of the dead crewmen who had served aboard the Indianapolis. He would get regular calls and letters from these people, basically inviting him to go gargle with broken glass or do other horrible things. As such, he became the final victim of the tragedy of the USS Indianapolis. So let's talk about the scene in Jaws, where Chief Brody, Quint, and Hooper are drinking and notice Quint has a tattoo that he's had removed. They find out it's a tattoo of the time he spent on the Indianapolis. And after it was sunk and his ordeal on the ocean, he had it removed. He tells a story of seeing a man asleep in the water, the one we told about. That is based on a true story from one of the survivors. And that is the story of the sinking of the USS Indianapolis in 1945. So, Krysta, any final thoughts you'd like to add?
I mean, all of it's pretty self-explanatory, sort of like the Lincoln one. The fact that the state denies so much that they've done in the past and is currently denying some of the things that they're doing currently really triggers me. It really puts me on it. It really concerns me for what would happen.
Well, footnote, I will tell you this. In 2000 or thereabouts, because several men in the Navy, several higher-ups in the Navy insisted on it, Congress vindicated McVeigh. They cleared his record of any charge from this. So...
But that didn't help any.
No, it's too little too late, but a good man shouldn't have been railroaded on these charges just because the government felt like there needed to be a scapegoat.
It's unfortunate that it had to happen in the first place.
And I agree with that wholeheartedly. Any final thoughts that you'd like to share, hun?
Oh, the whole thing is just frustrating. It's just, I mean, we all know that governments have misplaced intentions, poor decisions, so many times in history, but there's so much wrong with this conversation and this story that I can't even begin to...
You can't even say anything without almost offending somebody or ending up with it. That's just how it is.
The whole thing offends me. The whole thing offends me. And just But I mean, what are the lives of... How many people did they kill in Japan that same week? What are the lives of a couple hundred soldiers when we took out all of those poor innocent people? Women, children, people who didn't have anything to do with anything. So why would the military care if these soldiers drowned? You know?
Okay. I have a feeling on that, and you may not like it, but here it is. Japan wasn't going to surrender.
No.
Japan would have fought tooth and nail to the last man. And while I am not big on nuclear weapons, I really am not, they wanted the war over. And they begged Japan to surrender, and it just wasn't going to do it. So they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, they dropped the bomb on Nagasaki, and Japan surrendered. Was it horrible? Yeah. Was there a lot of life loss? Absolutely. How much life did it save, though? And we'll never have an answer to that question.
Well, but I'm saying is,
I feel like there might have been
that conversation is still stating that. I'm sorry, my verbiage is going to be totally off here. It's what acceptable casualties or something.
Right.
Like that whole you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. It's that mentality.
Or two rights don't make a wrong.
If the acceptable casualties to end the war was all of the people in Hiroshima that were killed and from dropping those bombs, then the fact that a couple hundred military people, a couple hundred Navy men went into the ocean and didn't come out, that's not that much of a difference, a loss in life, so you can see why it would be perfectly acceptable in their minds to cover it up for as long as they needed to cover their own butts. So,
Right.
as disgusting as I find it, it makes sense too.
Yeah. And really, the Navy tried to cover its own butt here. In my opinion, that's what a lot of this was about. The fact that nobody responded to any of the distress calls, didn't even look into them, didn't even send a plane to go, hey, fly over around where it's supposed to be.
Right.
You know, yeah, it may be a Japanese ruse, but why not send a couple of planes just to look? If they see other planes or are attacked, okay, you know. But if they see a bunch of men floating in an oil slick, hey, we got something going on here.
Yep.
And that's the part that I don't like, is the fact that the Navy tried very hard to hide its own mistakes here.
Right.
And to push them onto McVeigh, who, from everything I read, seemed to be the sort of honorable commander that you want when you're in the military.
Right.
He did everything he could for even was in the water with them, trying to help them survive. Right. And before he committed suicide, the survivors did start to meet. He turned up one time, only one time. It was the only time he could, and every man there hugged him, received him warmly. It was like one of their best friends that they hadn't seen in a long time had turned up. And so, yeah, just for them to go after McVeigh the way they did, just to me, that's a huge tragedy in this. On top of all the others, and there are tons. I mean, look, whatever happened, Japan to me is right after this is a stark reminder of the horrors of war. As I understand it, there is still a war or a wall in Hiroshima that has shadows on it that were burned on when that bomb dropped. Those people were reduced to ash, but their shadows were burned onto the wall forever. To this day, they're still there. And put me down as never wanting to see any of my girls in war or boys. And I do have a few older ones. So that's our show. Thanks for listening. If you're a new listener, thank you. If you're an old listener, thanks for coming back. Thanks to Bill Barrett, who does our theme music. If you need music for a project, Bill's your guy. You can reach him at Bill Barrett, and that's BEHRENDT at sbcglobal.net. Also, thanks to Paige Elmore of Reverie True Crime, who, along with our own Krysta, did our logo art. Thank you, Paige.
Thank you, Paige.
Thanks to Aaron Gnurk of the Big Dumb Fun Show, who does some local promoting for us. Thank you, Aaron. Join us next week as we look into the history and the hauntings of Alcatraz.
Wow.
Bye.
Bye.